well. And right at the end is Comrade Togo Kasa, also from ETC. On my other side, Comrade Lindiwe Zulu and Comrade Senzeni Zokwana, they are also members of the ETC subcommittee. So without wasting any time, I'll ask Comrade Enoch to come and address us. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Kisel. We titled our document Employment Creation, Economic Growth, Structural Change, Strengthening the Program of Radical Economic Transformation. At the 53rd National Conference in Mangaung in 2012, it was resolved, and I quote, "We are boldly entering the second phase of the transition from apartheid colonialism to a national democratic society. This phase will be characterized by decisive action to effect economic transformation and democratic consolidation, critical both to improve the quality of life of all South Africans and to promote nation building and social cohesion." Close quote. The 53rd Conference also resolved to give effect to the National Development Plan and the New Growth Path and the Industrial Policy Action Plan with the aim of stimulating growth, employment, and the reindustrialization of the South African economy. The policy conference will take stock and reflect on what has been achieved since the National Conference. Such an assessment will be done against ANC's historic and revolutionary mandate to transform South Africa from a society damaged by the injustices of colonialism and apartheid to a truly non-racial and non-sexist society, characterized by social justice and increased opportunity, particularly for Black South Africans. As the ANC, we acknowledge that it is through changing the structure of South African economy that inclusive growth will become possible. Inclusive growth cannot occur if those who are excluded are not given fair access to economic opportunities. This understanding can be traced back to the Freedom Charter, adopted in 1955, which states that all people in South Africa should enjoy equal rights and opportunities. Inclusive growth will also not occur if the productive base of the South African economy does not expand across sectors and space. In order to sharpen the ANC's model of socio-economic transformation, a package of decisive policy intervention is required. This package of policy intervention must be capable of achieving the following objectives. The first of those objectives is reducing unemployment and youth unemployment. The problem of youth unemployment must be alleviated by massively increased youth access to vocational training and apprenticeship. A well-designed system of vocational training and apprenticeship in combination with public service youth brigades will save many young people from unemployment and better prepare them with skills needed in the workplace, including entrepreneurial and small business skills. This is a particularly crucial response to the job-shedding dynamics of what has been termed the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which manifests its skill-based technological change and which threatens to leave many young people out of employment. Working together, business, government, labor must create up to 1 million internships in order to bring more young people into the labor economy. Returning land to our people and supporting land reform. ANC ANC policy commits government to returning land to our people, and due to this commitment, South Africa's constitution mandates that land reform must take place. The constitution's commitment to just and equitable compensation for the acquisition of land for land reform should be codified and should replace market-based evaluations of land. The process must be facilitated and accelerated by the passing of updated expropriation legislation by Parliament. Government should take heed of the Constitutional Court's finding that agreement on the quantum of fair compensation is not a precondition for land redistribution to take place and should never pay a premium in purchasing land for the purpose of land reform. In general, the success of land redistribution will be improved if there is greater oversight over land, farming equipment, technical skills transfer to the beneficiaries of land reform. Increasing black ownership and control. The imperative of ensuring increased black ownership and operational control in the economy must be achieved through a wide range of instruments. Priority must be given to ensuring black ownership in emerging new sectors of the economy, such as the potential that surrounds the development of new gas sectors as large-scale energy sources for South Africa, as well as the potential to take forward new opportunities linked to South Africa's ocean economy, as revealed through the work of the Operation Pakistan. Also crucial is the effective enforcement of the revised BEE codes across a range of sectors. In this regard, notable progress has been made in the construction sector in the recent period, which is to be given greater impetus by a government's program to turn South Africa into a construction site. Activating small business and cooperatives. Many black entrepreneurs would be more successful if they had some form of targeted financial support, including tax breaks and improved market access. A targeted program should be put in place to assist black entrepreneurs in setting up small business and cooperatives. This would fill a gap at a level below assistance currently offered to black industrialists. Supply chains in the public and private sector, including in the retail sector, should be opened up to small and medium-sized black business. Creating improved visibility of market opportunities should be prioritized using information technology tools. Raising the level of investment. The NDP envisages that combined investment by the private and public sector rise from the current levels of around 19% of GDP to about 30% of GDP. Policy certainty is key to long-term investment. Concerted efforts are required in order to eliminate policy uncertainties and unwarranted regulatory hurdles. Government should conduct an audit of the policy and regulatory constraints to investment and set a clear time frame for addressing them, linked to ministers' performance contracts. Confidence in the South African economy can be improved by credible programs of employment creation and radical transformation, which enhance long-run stability. In the medium term, investor confidence will be boosted if the rising national debt is brought under control. If South Africa maintains its investment-grade credit rating, if good governance of state-owned enterprises is achieved, if international norms of standards are maintained with regard to the regulation of the financial sector and other sectors, the multiplier effect of government and public sector infrastructure investment will increase as investor confidence in the economy rises. Strengthening social justice and improving conditions for the poor and working class. Confidence must also be built among the ANC's core constituency through the improvement of the quality of public education and healthcare services. This can be done through reliable and affordable public transport services, through effective regulation of the private sector to avoid unfair competition, price fixing, and unfair labor practices, as well as through putting systems in place to expose corrupt practices and prevent corruption from taking root. In order to better protect working class interests in the face of the threat of informalization, labor market regulation should be more effectively enforced. In particular, any attempt by unscrupulous employers to use loopholes to abuse the recently promulgated regulations on labor broking activity should be urgently dealt with. Improving the employment impact of infrastructure projects. South Africa's ongoing large-scale investment in electricity, rail, water, and transport infrastructure is a key to the economy's transformation. In order to maximize employment multipliers as well as skills transfer, a greater emphasis must be given to localization, that is, sourcing inputs from local rather than from abroad. Where appropriate, set-aside should be put in place in order to ensure that contracts are made available to black-owned companies and to promote broad-based black economic empowerment. Leveraging state procurement to support empowerment and transformation. The state needs to be deliberate in using its significant procurement spend to support goals of transformation, industrialization, and empowerment. Procurement budgets across departments, all spheres of government as well as state institutions must be directed towards supporting black firms, small business, and township enterprises. Reducing inequality and poverty. Increased access to employment will reduce income inequality, as will the implementation of a minimum wage to improve earnings by low-income workers. Increased access to efficiently delivered subsidized basic services as well as social grants also assist in bringing many poor households above the poverty line. South Africa's system of social grants must be defended and run efficiently and seamlessly because grants provide a key lifeline for the poor families. Dismantling monopoly practices and structures. Strict enforcement of competition legislation aimed at stamping out monopolistic practices is required. Some progress has been made by the competition authorities in this regard, and such interventions should be intensified. Price fixing and other uncompetitive practices should be stamped out throughout the economy. In line with this commitment, the ANC welcomes investigation by the Competition Commission into alleged price fixing and market allocation in foreign exchange trading by a number of banks and currency traders. Similarly, the ruling against uncompetitive conduct by state-owned entity SA is also welcomed as a decisive step against monopoly practices. Furthermore, the ANC should mandate a detailed investigation into the underlying structure of the economy in order to recommend ways to reduce and remove barriers to entry and dismantle monopolistic and oligopolistic structures in certain key sectors. For example, a state-owned bank, possibly based on a transformed post bank, can serve to widen access to banking services for many and can assist in changing the structure of the South African financial sector. Asserting South Africa's interest globally. South Africa must improve the way in which the country articulates and asserts its economic interests in the global economy. Globalization has assisted South Africa to gain access to capital inflows, expanded markets for exports, and new technologies. Global trade has made certain imported goods more affordable for consumers. Nonetheless, South Africa must assert its right to change the overall structure of its economy from one based mainly on colonial extraction to one based on production and expansion of its domestic industrial base and services. The scale and scope of research and development must be increased so as to facilitate the development of new products and technologies, such as the ongoing effort to facilitate an advance in platinum beneficiation through collaborative R&D around the application of new fuel cell technology. With regard to international financial flows, its effective mechanism must be put in place to stem illicit capital flows from South Africa and Africa more widely. Improving integration to the African economy, and an overriding priority should be to work to promote African regional integration. South Africa's economic policy should be integrated with the African region. Specifically, this means taking steps to enlarge free trade areas existing in the SADC region and other regional economic communities into large, more expansive FTAs. The aim of this is to promote more intra-African trade and support industrialization through the creation of large regional markets. Stimulating inclusive growth. All the above interventions will assist South Africa to move on to a more inclusive growth path. Inclusive growth can only be delivered by programs of a democratic developmental state. The ANC is acutely aware of the fact that economic growth is necessary, but not a sufficient condition for an effective program of economic transformation. Growth on its own is not always inclusive. To be inclusive, growth must combine growth, GDP per capita, with increased levels of employment, expansion of productive activities, and massively increased opportunities, particularly for Black South Africans. Well-conceived and well-executed transformation programs are necessary to improve the quality of growth. On the other hand, as has been seen in recent years, the possibility of mass-based economic transformation is severely retarded by low levels of economic growth. In order to achieve radical transformation and inclusive growth, the discussion document on economic transformation outlines relevant aspects of the NDP and identifies key interventions which are required over the next 5-year period in order to advance the NDP's vision. For this purpose, the focal chapters of the NDP are the chapters on employment, Chapter 3, economic infrastructure, Chapter 4, transition to low economy, Chapter 5, inclusive rural economy, Chapter 6, education and training, Chapter 9, and building a capable state, Chapter 13. On the credit rating, let me preface before reading. A couple of things. We developed this document a long time ago. That's the first point. The second point, on Thursday, we only had Standard & Poor that put us on a junk status. Fitch came in on Friday. We do not have a fully understanding of the implications at this stage. So what we'll be making here are preliminary comments on what should be done. I wanted to preface what I'm going to read with that. The downgrading of South Africa's credit rating by international rating agencies, Fitch and Standard & Poor, was provide a clear signal that the country is going to have a pull together like never before to overcome its economic problems. A credit rating being a measure of how likely the country will be able to repay its loan in full is not an unimportant indicator of the state of the economy. Furthermore, a deterioration in South Africa's credit rating will have a major negative impact on our country's ability to raise debt funding to fund its development program. This is particularly critical given the low levels of domestic savings. Achieving an investment-grade status was one of the greatest successes of the ANC government after we took over a fully junk state in 1994. The ANC needs to mobilize collective action by all South Africans in the private sector, labor and government to do everything necessary to bring the country back to investment grade. The essential message that were conveyed by the rating agencies were that we needed to deal with the structural changes of the South African economy, including dealing with sluggish growth. Secondly, we need to deal with concerns around contingent liabilities from state-owned enterprises. These threaten the state balance sheet and, by extension, the financial stability of the nation. The other message from these agencies is that most recent reshuffle has sent a signal of political instability and political uncertainty. Among the various actions that we must take, are the following. We need a renewed focus on growth-enhancing policies that are required to reverse South Africa's economic fortunes. Growth is critical to raise the potential for socio-economic development within the country. An immediate and the key issue is to stabilize outlook for governance in our state institutions, ensure that SOEs are financially stable, and address policy uncertainties. The ANC must work together with all spheres of government, as well as other key players in the economy, including organized labor or business, to ease operating conditions so that firms can continue to be supported in this period. We will seek solutions to ensure a coordinated rehabilitation plan on the economic circumstances that led to the current situation. Convene an economic roundtable with all key stakeholders to discuss substantial issues affecting the economy, particularly aimed at achieving the objectives of lifting investment levels to 30% of GDP. These roundtables will be held at regular intervals. We'll do everything possible to ensure that low-income workers, poor households, and vulnerable groups are cushioned from any adverse impact that may result from the current situation. This may include supporting firms with limited access to credit finance located in historical underserviced areas and those that have capacity to employ large sections of unskilled labor to ensure they continue operations during this time. Assist firms to improve access to export markets in the region. Government departments will have to optimize their efficiency programs in order to effectively support increased economic activity. Government will maintain its commitment to support growth and job creation. Improved efforts to reform the governance of state-owned enterprise, in particular streamline the process of appointing CEOs and boards and clarifying accountability lines while indicating that merit-based appointments and transparent performance pay regimes are not negotiable. In conclusion, we want to mobilize society behind this program. The ANC has made numerous interventions which have improved the lives of our people of South Africa since the dawn of democracy in 1994. But millions of black South Africans continue to live in poverty and destitution. To overcome this legal, the ANC must now lead society into a second phase of South Africa's democratic transition and mobilize society around a program of radical social and economic transformation built on the following key pillars. A reconstructive macroeconomic framework calibrated to drive constructive policy in a sustainable manner, funded by well-managed fiscals, well-governed state-owned enterprise. This will build confidence and enhance multiplier effects of ongoing large-scale investment in public infrastructure. A strengthened package of radical economic interventions aimed at increasing access to education, employment opportunities and land, as well as subsidized services for poor households and minimum wage regime to assist the working poor. Strengthen relations with the private sector to encourage employment-creating projects in a range of key sectors, including mining, manufacturing, agriculture, tourism, construction, retail, and finance. Such interventions will seek to incentivize private sector behavior towards inclusive growth and employment creation, but would also entail an increased focus on deterring anti-competitive and monopolistic conduct, and will strengthen the capacity of the state for partnering and monitoring private sector activity. The assertion of the ANC vision and leadership of society through credible interventions to de-racialize the South African economy, create significantly high levels of employment, and encourage inclusive growth which will improve the lives and opportunities for all South Africans. I conclude this thing. You can see I read it from prompt to the end because this is instruction from this team that I must read it. I tend to go offline, so they made sure that this time I don't go. I read it, the instruction from the team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Enoch, for that disciplined summary of the economic transformation document. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, these press briefings are taking part, firstly, to ensure that as wide a cross-section of people are able to engage the policy documents. What we come out with as the ANC should not just be ANC policy, but a policy that has been consulted thoroughly in society. They are in addition to the work that we're doing in our structures, in our branches, as well as other stakeholders. I also want to re-emphasize the point made by Comrade Enoch, that these documents were developed a while ago. They were not some of the current developments that we're having to deal with now. They remain evolving though, because as you know, the policy will only be adopted at the 54th National Conference, which will be held in December of this year. So I'm going to ask that as you raise your questions, seek to contain them to the policy interventions that are being proposed by the ANC. Let's not seek to dwell into issues of contemporary news and current affairs, but rather the principles around the policy interventions. So I'll take the first round of hands. If you could please, when it's your turn to speak, introduce yourself, pose your question as succinctly as possible, please. Thank you. Can I see any hands? Number one. I've got one hand. It means a document as clear as possible. Any other hands? Okay, Ali, you can go.
Okay, thank you very much. Kolem Gambi from ENCA. Chair, you speak about the recent credit ratings downgrade, and I certainly want to take you up on that. And you're saying that one of the things that needs to be done now is to pull together like never before. Do you foresee the country doing that in particular? Do you see the governing party pulling together like never before to try and weather this storm of credit ratings downgrades, given that we only have one left? That's a credit rating agency that seeks to, put out its assessment of South Africa right now. But also, importantly, do you think the country will be able to pull together with a figure like President Jacob Zuma still at the helm of the party and government? And just as a last question, I'm not sure if I missed it during your statement, the issue around nuclear. We're receiving reports this morning that it is now in full swing. In fact, a request for proposals is likely to come as early as June this year, with likely bidders being announced in the first quarter of 2018. Where are we in as far as that is concerned? And is the country ready for that? Can it afford it? Thank you.
Thank you. Number two, is there any other hand? Number two, number three, number four. In that order, please. Number five, yeah.
Thank you so much. Tsidi Madia from News 24. I'm just going to ask, it's a very basic question, but I think it's been bandied about a lot, and there's a lot of confusion about clarity. Can I please just get a thorough definition of what radical economic transformation actually means to the ANC? There seems to be no agreement on what that actually is. Secondly, the policy papers, the documents speak about the importance of building a developmental state with a technical and political capacity. I just want to ask, some people believe that the ANC no longer has political capacity as it speaks, and if that is correct, though, what are the challenges to that? Thank you.
Alvin Sampio from SABC TV News. On the credit downgrades, on the ratings downgrades, the recent two, and there's emphasis in this document as well that the country needs to avoid any further downgrades, or otherwise it will result in resources being taken away from development. I wonder then, is there any anticipation from the subcommittee that if we fail, as you put it, to pull together as never before, that the country could face a recession. The president said the economic growth is expected to be at a 1.3%, but if borrowing becomes more expensive and infrastructure or funding for infrastructure is being taken away, that would mean that we'll have an impact on economic growth as well. So is there an expectation at all that we could hit a recession? And the other question is on the nuclear build project. In the document, there is emphasis, which was quite strange for me to read, which speaks of requirements, well, it speaks of the nuclear power generation, but speaks of requirements of affordability as well as procedural fairness and transparency. Do you anticipate that there could be some corrupt dealings or underhand dealings in the nuclear project?
Thank you. In front of you, sir.
Thank you, Clement Manyatela from Eyewitness News. Just on the credit rating, you say that the country needs to pull together to overcome its economic problems. Do you think that the ANC is pulling together on this? Because I'm asking this because you've got senior ANC leaders that welcome the junk status, that speak about how they don't care much about the rent falling. If it falls, they'll pick it up. Are you happy about those comments that are made by senior leaders of the ANC? You say the country must pull together, but is the ANC pulling together on this to ensure that they overcome the economic problems? Thank you.
Behind you.
Good morning. My name is Ntebo. I'm with the SABC. Chair, in your preliminary response to the credit ratings, you spoke about the country pulling together, including the private sector. How confident are you that the private sector will come to the party? I'm saying this against the backdrop of some people reading the private sector or perceiving the private sector as sort of celebrating when the country has been downgraded. How confident are you that it will come to the party? And again, you spoke about capacitating the SOEs. As the ANC, would you say maybe you failed to ensure that these state-owned enterprises are as effective as they required to be? And now we are where we are because for some time you've neglected them and maybe behave as an absentee landlord in terms of ensuring that indeed they become effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Comrade Enoch, I'll request you to also direct, if you'd like, any of the members of the panel to speak to the question. Thanks.
I'm not going to deal with radical economic transformation. SG says I'm right-wing. So it's career limiting to answer that question. So Comrade Cooks will deal with that question. Let me, okay. Let me start with this issue of pulling together. Let me start with the ANC. Is there a scope of pulling together in the ANC? Let me give you an analogy I did in the NWC on Monday. You know, on Monday I said, this discussion in the ANC reminds me when the state of emergency was declared in 1985. I was sitting in a shipping in Guatemala, a resting place called Guagama. And somebody comes to me and said, hey, there's a state of emergency. Mind you, in our lifetime, in our age, the last time there was a state of emergency was 1961 or 1960. So we didn't know anything about state of emergency. And people asked me, there's a statement. I said, hi guys, what is it? They said, no, state of emergency means that the constitution will be suspended and so on. I then said, no. It doesn't matter. We don't have a constitution in any event. The constitution is theirs. And I continue to enjoy my beer. And then guys realized that, no, this one is going to be arrested. They kind of left me in a different place. I didn't know that they arranged that I must be, these people must give me a place to sleep. They left me with a beer and said they're going to fetch me now. And then when I woke up in the morning, sober now, I don't drink anymore. Do not want to write that. I'm just telling you the story. When I woke up in the morning, sober now, the streets were full of police, including railway police. There was still railway police at the time. Everything. Then it dawned to me, okay, this is like a martial law reality of the state of emergency. Why am I using this analogy? Is that people in South Africa have never known, other than the Rubicon speech in 1985, we've never known the junk status. The only time South Africa came closer to where we are was in 1985, when on the 15th of August 1985, in the Rubicon speech, P.W. Botha failed to deliver what the world thought he would do in the current crisis. And then what happens, by the end of August, we already were forced to have two currencies, the commercial and the financial rand. Can people still remember that? So, yeah. Majority of us are young, they may not remember that. So, people don't have experience of the junk status. So, that ANC people are part of society. So, we will have to grapple with the question, how do everybody understand the consequences of a junk status? So it's going to be work which we do internally to make sure that we pull together, we've got an understanding of the implications of the junk status, particularly if we want to help the Minister of Finance. Because if people are serious about helping that Minister of Finance to achieve the result of this thing, they've got to sing from the same book. I'm not saying we are today, but I'm saying that's an effort we need to be doing. As far as for the private sector, you know, Leslie Boyd used to say the reason they set up business is not out of because they wanted to create jobs or anything, they want to make profit. Surely, when we are downgraded, it's their interest to make money, and therefore, if they have an interest in making sure that we are not downgraded, because it's impacting on their profit. But I think we've created institutions in South Africa, such as NEDLEC, which have been very useful in mobilizing business labor around a common vision. My suspicion is that that is possible. And I think we've got to take this debate behind personalities and look at what is in the interest of the country. And I suspect South Africans will be able to rise to that level. As to the nuclear aspect, I want to take you a step back. I want to take you a step back. In 2010, we adopted a program, both the ANC and government. I'm not saying that's still relevant, but the conditions were different, but we adopted a program, what was called Integrated Resource Plan in 2010, which outlined the generation mix in South Africa. In that mix, there was nuclear of 9,600 megawatts. That was in 2010. I'm not saying conditions have not changed. Conditions have changed, which may necessarily mean we may have to relook at that. We then said recently that if we do nuclear, we must do it at a pace, at a scope and pace which is affordable. The test becomes affordability. Will the country afford it? That's the question. So, our take on this matter, government will have to assess the affordability issue. It is important to note that government processes take their own time. It's possible this thing has been in the pipeline for a while and is coming into tender processes now. It was before we declared a junk status, okay? Surely, in the light of the junk status, we'll have to sharpen our pencil and revise our expenditure patterns as government. Radical economic transformation is for you, Cooks. Are we anticipating a recession? That's a possibility. SOEs, look, these two rating agencies have highlighted the SOEs. A couple of these issues they've highlighted is their government structure, which we need to look into. Secondly, is their balance sheet and management of that balance sheet thereof, and therefore the possibility of those contingent liabilities being transferred into the balance sheet of the state. Surely that has got to be taken into account, given the numbers we're talking about 400 billion rand. So that issue is going to be taken into, we will have to take a closer look into the state-owned enterprises if we want to respond effectively to this downgrade. Cooks?
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you very much, Matima. No, Ziki, for a while, remember this resolution was taken in 2012 at the conference in Mangaung, this radical economic transformation. It wasn't defined at that time, but it has subsequently been defined as fundamental change in the system, in the structure, systems, institutions, and patterns of ownership, management, and control of the economy. That's a succinct definition of radical socio-economic transformation. So you've heard the president say this thing even yesterday or the day before when he was addressing the summit of Salga. He explained it very well. This, in other words, you have got these key elements: structure, the system, institutions, ownership, management, and control. So if we talk radical socio-economic transformation, it means we must deal with those elements in the economy. If you take just structure alone, you're talking about monopoly and oligopoly in the economy. In other words, concentration and over-concentration of ownership. But not only that, but ownership, this concentration in the hands of the white minority South Africans. Even non-South Africans or foreign South Africans who own the economy. So what you need to do, you need to deconcentrate, to break down the monopoly and oligopoly concentration of ownership of the economy of South Africa, so that you have more inclusive ownership, inclusive control, inclusive management of the economy in South Africa. So that definition with those elements is very clear. Lastly, the developmental state and political and technical capacity. Political capacity actually is there. Look at the policies of it's all of us in South Africa, including opposition parties, you've heard them say this, that the ANC has got very good policies. But the problem is at a technical level, the managerial and technical capacity of the state to implement those good policies. We can't hide that. I liked Professor Hlophe a couple of weeks ago. He simply said, the policies are there. The problem is performance. So that's what is a challenge that we faced with. And I think that if you look at the last Lekgotla, for example, the last Lekgotla of February, you may have come across the document. That document actually makes the point there. It says that government must train senior officials, particularly because we are building a developmental state, that senior officials must be trained in development theory in particular, so that they are able to be advisors at all spheres throughout the spheres of government, to be able to provide strategic kind of support and advice to political leadership, so that we can move in step throughout the spheres of government ensuring that the developmental state is realized and inclusive growth is realized, so that we can defeat the triple challenge of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll take the second round. Can I just say that we've responded to the issues around the credit downgrade, we've responded to the issues on nuclear, so we'll be concentrating on other aspects within the document. Number one, Sis Thandeka. Number two, is there anybody else who hasn't spoken yet before I go to the repeat offenders? Okay, number three, number four, number five, in that order, please. Yes, ma'am. You can go. Sorry, just 1 second. The sound is not very good. Is that mic on or are we getting a new one?
I apologize for that. I'll try and shout and raise my voice.
No, it's
a little
perfect
bit
now.
better. I was saying that the cost of capital is too high. Interest rates are an issue. They are implicated in our high unemployment rate. They are further implicated in the deindustrialization of the country. So against this backdrop, I fail to see how a black industrialist program or even a white industrialist program can succeed. I think manufacturing has been decimated by, among other things, the high interest rate climate. In fact, when the head of the ETC, the chairman, speaks about the possibility of a recession, in fact, if the policy response is to lift interest rates further in response, will most definitely tip into recession. So please clarify this apparent contradiction for me. The second thing that I would like to know is the play in platinum. South Africa has a near monopoly in platinum and produces about close to 90% of the world's platinum. The idea of creating an OPEC so that South Africa can advantageously control the value chain in platinum has been bandied about, but seldom put into concrete documents and programs of execution and action. May I know where we stand on that and what will become of that idea? Further, I'd like to know these economic forums, multi-stakeholder, will they be driven by the state? How frequently will they take place, or will they be driven by the ruling party? Thank you very much.
Sorry, can you just repeat you said your question, will they be driven by who before you said?
The state, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
Or will they be driven by the ruling party? Who will convene the stakeholders and to what end?
Thank you. Number two. Sorry, excuse me, sir?
Hi,
Sorry, if you could.
Hi, Fifi here from CNBC Africa. Sorry, I do have another ratings question that I would love to get Mr. Godongwane's view on. There's an economist this morning who is being headlined on the news saying that the ratings decisions were not fair, saying that the ratings agencies don't understand the structural challenges of the South African economy and that the growth that we were achieving
I'm so sorry. Can you put the mic closer to you?
Okay,
Yeah.
and that the growth that we were achieving under investment grade rating wasn't benefiting the majority that you seek to bring into the economy. I'd just like to know, do you think that the ratings decision was fair? Number two, the talk of a recession, a very, very scary thought, but if a recession is possible, will it still be possible to achieve inclusive growth? And just lastly, a quick one. Mr. Godongwane, you said that you're still studying the implications of the ratings decision. How soon will you be able to brief us on what the implications will be, particularly for the ANC's policy being economic transformation?
Thank you very much. Number 3, Clement.
Thank you very much, Clement, again. It's just a follow-up question on the answers that I got. I hope you don't mind. On the question that I asked about the ANC pulling together, I just want to be clear. Am I correct, or are you suggesting that there might be some people within the ANC that do not understand the consequences of junk status, and that is why they make the reckless statements? And the second question on nuclear, which is a follow-up as well, are you saying that in light of our credit rate, in light of this downgrade, must government then revise its expenditure patterns in light of the junk status? My last question is on land reform. I see on the document, it says that the property clause in the Constitution must be codified and replace the idea of market value being used when land is bought for restitution. But there's no mention of changing the Constitution to allow expropriation without compensation. And the president has been leading the charge to get black parties to work together to ensure that the Constitution changes and there is expropriation without compensation. What is the position of the subcommittee on this? Because it's not, I don't see anything in the document suggesting this change, yet some leaders of the ANC, and particularly the president, has spoken a lot about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aldrin Simpe again. On the issue of land, where is the land audit? How long will it take for that land audit to be out? Since Bulukwan, it's been about 10 years. And for now, I think we only know that how much government owns and how much is in private hands, but we don't know in terms of black and white who owns what. During the State of the Nation address and also during the January 8th statement, President Jacob Zuma spoke about a law to be implemented so that 30% of contracts will be subcontracted to black companies or small black enterprises. Why doesn't this 30% subcontract find expression in this document in particular? And how would you ensure that this 30% subcontractors don't become silent partners in these big deals? Because you've had BEE, for instance, where the BEE laws were there, but people were then fronting. They were silent partners in companies, not really benefiting, and the issue around skills transfer as well has been a problem. Would you be able to monitor whether skills have been transferred to these black companies? On the on the FICA amendment bill, Mr. Godongwane, when we spoke last year, before the President sent the bill back to Parliament, you said that what the President should probably do is send the bill to the Constitutional Court to have the constitutionality of it tested at the Constitutional Court. Do you believe that that's still the route that should be taken at the moment? Do you believe that Parliament is the right platform to deal with the constitutional aspects that President Jacob Zuma has dealt with? And then the final question is on wages. There's a lot of emphasis around improving the wages of low-income earners, but there's nothing being said about the amount of money that CEOs are earning. Doesn't the ANC find it a problem that some CEOs are getting multi-million rands salaries, yet there are the cleaners who get something that some argue is next to nothing, not even a minimum wage, not even a minimum wage for that matter. And I wonder, when you look at Thomas Piketty, he makes the suggestion, even during the Nelson Mandela lecture, he makes the suggestion that if you look at Sweden and if you look at Germany, where labor forms part of the boards of companies, should you start having this discussion with COSATU as well, that maybe it is time for labor to form part of boards, because that's where the CEO's salaries are ratified? Thanks.
Thank you. 5.
Thank you very much. Colin Gambi, I just have 3 quick questions.
Chair, you speak about people being trained in government in order to, be capacitated. I think it was Mr. Nkwinti who was speaking about that. While you talk on that point, interestingly, I remember the former Finance Minister, SABC Jonas, speaking about the erosion of institutional capacity in government as a result of people being appointed into government positions fashionably, as a result of ANC factional politics. So is that likely to happen, that you're going to have people in government who are going to have experience given the current status quo? Also, on the issue of the president, you've not answered that question. I'm going to insist on it. Can the country pull out of this impending economic crisis with a figure like President Jacob Zuma, someone who already is being talked about as a divisive figure? Can the country pull out? And then just lastly, I'd like to find out from the chair if he still holds the same view, or what his views are, rather, I should say, given what you said to us last year in September, that what was happening in relation to Pravin Gordhan was a political issue, or he was being pursued politically in order to hollow out national treasury. Now, he has been removed. Do you have confidence in the people that have been appointed into that department now? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oli. I'm going to ask Comrade Lindiwe Zulu to come up first. Oli, Comrade Enoch and most of the members sitting here are members of the National Working Committee of the African National Congress. That working committee issued a statement on Monday where it reaffirmed its absolute confidence in Comrade Malusi Gigaba as the Minister of Finance. So that one I think we don't need to reopen. Comrade Lindy, as you come up, if you could also then speak to the issue of SMMEs and skills transfer, please.
Another skill transfer. That question, remember, that is within the BE code, do we transfer skills to black industrialists?
Well, maybe let me start by the 30% procurement, the question that was asked, and say part of the reason why there is insistence on the 30% procurement is partly to continue opening up the space in the value chain of whether it's within government procurement or private sector procurement. But in this particular case, government's expenditure runs into billions. And I think it's 600 and something billion, Comrade Gooks? The expenditure of government, it runs into billions. And particularly from the Department of Small Business Development, we are very conscious of the fact that part of what would empower your small and medium enterprises and cooperatives is to get access into that. Yes, I know that many a times we say, we get access to government, then government doesn't pay us on time and all that. We do have systems in place where we're trying to strengthen the systems to make sure that people are paid on time. Part of the 30% procurement also is not just about just accessing the 30%. It's also about empowering small and medium enterprises through skills transfer, skills development, because you cannot run away from the fact that small and medium enterprises are coming into a space where they have to compete with people or businesses that have been there for more than 100 years, and companies that have got bigger pockets in terms of their finances. They are able to get a contract and deal with that contract without having to go through what small and medium enterprises, black-owned, women-owned, and people with disability-owned. So as we have a Department of Small Business Development, it is specifically to focus on that. And I must say that the formation of this department has to a very large extent assisted us in pushing for this, because this is not something new. 30% is not something new, it's been there before, but being the voice of small and medium enterprises, not only just out in the public, but being a voice of small and medium enterprises within government itself, and searching and looking for those opportunities within government. Our role is to make sure that government itself opens up those opportunities. The skills transfer is also very important. It's not possible for us, particularly as black people who were left out of the mainstream economy of South Africa, to think that within a short period of time, we are able to break this monopoly that we are talking about, to be able to enter into the mainstream economy, whether it's in the agricultural sector, whether it's in the industrialization, the manufacturing sector itself, and I think Minister of Agriculture can be able to speak towards that issue of empowerment from an agricultural point of view. One of the things that we think is going to happen, my experience again as a Minister of Small Business Development, is that the pulling together of South Africans, besides what you see out in the street, which we have consistently said, it is the constitutional right of people to demonstrate and express their dissatisfaction about one thing or the other. But the different story is when, as South Africans, we see that we are facing certain challenges. I know that the private sector, through either the presidential working committees or any other working committees that we have, we want to pull together because we have to make sure that ultimately we turn around the economy of South Africa. There was a question about the discussions as to whether the discussions are going to be conducted by government or the ANC. These are ANC briefings. Even the engagement will be from an ANC perspective, so that the African National Congress as a party engages differently from government, because remember that we've always been complaining ourselves that the dog cannot, the tail cannot wag the dog. And in the experience of the 23 years, we found that many times comrades go to government and they are subsumed and swallowed by the bureaucratic processes of government, only to find that the accountability from an ANC point of view needs to be strengthened. Lastly, I do need to say this because it is the African National Congress itself that has said it's important for head office to have the necessary capacity, whether it's researchers, whether it's whatever, it has to have the necessary capacity so that the accountability of how the policies of the ANC are being implemented must be monitored here in Luthuli House. And then those of us who are in government, even though we sit in the National Executive Committee, the National Working Committee, we must also be accountable to the ANC. Thank you.
You want to say something? Okay, after
Cox. Excuse me. I thought that the chair would deal with the reindustrialization question. Thanks, Chair. I don't think there's any country, just follow this, look at South Korea, look at some countries in Latin America who have been downgraded. There's not a single country that ever said this decision is fair. There's nowhere, because the implications of sub-investment status of a country is exactly, the implications are what Ms. Kubul was talking about as a challenge for reindustrialization. So it can never be fair. The question, therefore, is not that one, whether it is fair or not fair. We are, as far as we as South Africans are concerned, it cannot be fair because it has got serious negative implications on South African population, particularly the poor. Now, when the old lady who gets a social grant, 1,600, and goes to buy her grandchildren's shoes to school for school, and also wants to buy groceries, and find that this money is no longer worth 1,000, this rent is no longer worth, rather this grant is no longer worth that 1,600 rands across the counter, because the price of the loaf of bread would have risen by 9.5%. The price of the pair of shoes for grandchildren has risen by exactly that. What amount of money then? What is that 1,600 rand worth? So nobody can therefore think that this thing is fair. It's not fair, but that's not the point. The point is, how do we get ourselves as government of South Africa? How do we get ourselves out of the junk status we're in now? Secondly, how do we prevent Moody's coming in and do exactly the same thing? That's really what it is about. Now, in other words, that decision is not fair to that extent, but it is not something that we are in control of. And it is not something that when it happens, we go out there and shout about it and shout against them, etc. Because we are part of the world economy, and the world economy is dominated by capitalism. And these are some of the institutions of capitalism. As an open economy, especially South Africa is an open economy because we're a capitalist economy. These things will be there. But the question is how we as politicians and government in particular, how we position ourselves in such a way that we avoid these things happening, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where our people will say, look, your policies aren't working. When the policies are good, it's a political courage as well. We need to ensure that there's political courage to ensure that this technical capacity of the state is built, and that these policies of the state are implemented, and therefore there must be consequences where there's no implementation, because they are there. Consequences need political courage. Recession, I think this is exactly the point. You see, when you have a recession, you are going to have more people being unemployed. We cannot afford to add more people to the current high rate of unemployment in our country, especially young people. That's why when the chair started here, the very first thing was unemployment, particularly unemployment of young people. If you remember what the State South Africa report was saying, the last one, it said it's very difficult for school leavers to get job. Now, because we tend to say 5 years experience, where would they have gotten that 5 years experience? So these are the kind of things that we need to deal with and ensure that those kinds of smallanyana things, sorry for smallanyana. You see, these are the things that we must deal with. Now you'll see, you would have picked up that here, there's something that talks about turning South Africa into a construction site. You would have picked that thing up here. That's exactly what the government and the governing party has decided. The governing party has decided that government must come up with a program turning South Africa into a construction site. And that's what now government is working on. Because what we're talking about here, we're talking about the reshaping, the decolonizing of the space in South Africa. Decolonizing it means exactly that you have areas in South Africa where this racially structured South Africa, the architecture of this country. You have, this side you have got beautiful leafy suburbs, just separated by street. This side you have got, terrible, terrible, terrible shacks. That's why we have fires and then we have people dying, etc. ANC has instructed government to come up with a major program called Turning South Africa into a Construction Site. We're busy working on that now. We've got a team of technicians from DBSA, IDC, TCTA, and the rest, working on how to turn this South Africa into a construction site, focusing on townships and rural areas to create jobs, particularly for young people. So this is what we cannot say, therefore, because there's downgrading, those programs must be shelved. We must find a way of ensuring that those programs actually turn the economy around, so that what would be a deep recession is turned around to becoming an area of growth in our economy. Lastly, on this question of land, that's Aldrin has asked this question. Perhaps Clement also has raised this point. No. Just remember this, that the policy of the ANC insofar as land is concerned, land reform is concerned, has got just the following characteristics. It says that state land is leasehold. You can see the resolution. I'm just briefly. It says leasehold. In other words, you don't sell state land. Second, it says privately owned land, land. It says freehold with limited extent. In other words, introducing ceilings. You remember that? And to that extent, now there is a bill, and I hope that you are participating, looking at that bill right as we speak. There is a bill. That bill is out for public comment. It's a Regulation of Agricultural Land Holdings Bill. It's introducing those ceilings. What we're asking South Africans, including yourselves, ladies and gentlemen of the media, is to participate and help government determine the ceilings in terms of small-scale, commercial, and viable farm, medium-scale, commercial, viable farm, and large-scale, so that we are able, therefore, to limit that extent of holdings. And then whatever is above the limit in terms of those three categories is bought by the state and redistributed. Now, there is no provision there that says expropriation without compensation. It says compensate in terms of just and equitable principle of the Constitution. Then the third one is that of foreign land ownership. It says no foreigner should own land in South Africa. Foreigners must then lease land, and it says long-term lease with a minimum of 30 years. It then says, insofar as the people who own land already, in other words, from the day that that bill becomes law, moving on. But the question is, what do you do with those who own land right now? Then we're saying, in terms of the bill, we're saying convert that. There will be a conversion from privately owned to, so that the state will buy that land and compensate in terms of the just and equitable principle. The debate, though, is raising this question of saying, should we not then consider expropriation without compensation? That is not what is policy today. Expropriation without compensation relates to, one, instances where the land would have been acquired through fraudulent means. Two, where the land is used for criminal purposes. The big question that is facing us in terms of this now going towards the policy conference is a question that says, should we not? So this is an aspirational question. It's not a policy right now. In June, it will be debated. If there's a decision moving towards expropriation without compensation, it will go to the national conference where the final decision will be taken. And then only after that would we know that there would be expropriation without compensation. I think that's it. Land audit. No, man, Aldrin. Remember, we did that, and then we found out exactly what you were saying. And I'm happy you asked this question, by the way, because let's explain this. When we're talking about 14% owned by the state, we're not including the 13%, which is what was Bantustan land. All right? We're talking about land that has been acquired since 1994. Secondly, when we talk about the 67% that is privately owned, we do not know, we have not disaggregated that in terms of race, nationality, and gender. All right? Now, the 7% that is outstanding is a 7% which is very difficult to determine, particularly because it's these commercial lands that were in Bantustan areas, particularly the former Transkei area and Bophuthatswana, former Bophuthatswana. Those are the areas for disaggregation further. So there's work that's been done there. Now, we have just concluded further audit that relates to nationality, gender, and race. That has been just concluded. I've just signed a memorandum to Cabinet. After that, it's going to be published. Once Cabinet look at that, it's going to be published to that. But the challenge is that it's institutional now. The land that is owned by trusts and companies, because the trusts are controlled, we're dealing with justice on this question. The trusts are controlled by justice and the companies DTI. We're dealing with this question because we want them, we're saying to them, because South Africa, we moved, when we became a democracy in 1994, one of the things that we did in Home Affairs, we did away with race in registration of people. Glenn Thomas you think that Glenn Thomas is an Englishman. No, he's an African guy there in the Eastern Cape. Glenn Thomas, you see. That is a problem now. Same with deeds. The deeds registration in South Africa after democracy stopped using race. Yet race would have been used as a measure of progress. So those complications in terms of the institutions, those are things now that we're dealing with. In terms of, therefore, the regulation of agricultural land holdings bill, there is a commission there, provision for a commission. In that commission, whether you are a legal persona or you are a human being, one body, you will have to declare your ownership of land to that commission so that we then can know in South Africa who owns South Africa. So that's where we are right now. So that law, that bill is going to be critical in making those determinations. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, you want to say something?
Thanks, Chairperson. I will try the question Sister Ndeka asked on the country being a major producer of platinum. Platinum has been linked to the auto catalyst converters. And it has been very private to fluctuations whenever the auto industry is affected. Recently, the Department of Science and Technology, in partnership with some companies like Anglo Platinum, has begun to get involved into a new program of energy production on hydroplatinum fuel cells. One such project was launched in Free State, and some company offices are using that form of fuel. Of energy. Then the question is, how much do we promote that such that we were able then to use platinum such that it does not become vulnerable to global commodity fluctuations, but something is being done that is fair and that is clear. The second one is on the issue of wages. That has been a debate of trade unions as to deal with apartheid at different scales of payments. And this has been one area that has been engaged in. Yes, currently maybe still CEOs are earning more than their lower-end employees. And this is something I think we need to debate going forward. But remember, even in Germany, they didn't wake up and say there will be a social compact between stakeholders. It was as a result of the Second War that plunged that country into chaos. Whether then we are ready as a country to debate that, I think is something we should be engaged in. But what are the characteristics of that given our societal views in dealing with things going forward? So I think that is quite an interesting debate I think we need to have, but it will not only end only on wages. It should be broad, even to include transformation of the economy, get those who have not been part of that ongoing. And that's why Germany is the only country globally I know of that has got a social compact. And whether trade unions can be able to change the behavior of companies using that forum. Thanks.
Thank you. I think the question of the president keeps coming back, and I think that we need to lay that question to rest, because the president is the president of the African National Congress. He is the president of the country, and that we will continue to defend the president as members of the African National Congress, as long as he is a member of the African National Congress, as long as he remains a member of as long as he remains also a president of the country, we will all respect that. Safe to say, obviously, that some of the attacks that are out there, some of them are very painful. Because to see a newspaper headline with the president being portrayed as similar, almost like Hitler, and being drawn in that is just unbelievable that 23 years down the line of our democracy, of our trying to build a non-racial South Africa, of our trying to build tolerance for each other, we wake up to a picture like that. But I know, and we know, as members of the African National Congress, that it has taken us long to be where we are. We are confident as leadership of the African National Congress that we will be able to deal with the challenges that we're facing, including that of the depiction of a president being depicted like he is a Hitler. And all the emotional things that are happening in the outside, we pool our resources, both human and otherwise, to make sure that we build a better South Africa. What is important of us as members of the African National Congress is to continue to pull South Africans together, because I'm hearing the question again repeating itself. Shall we be able to pull South Africans back together to be able to protect the country, defend the country, and also deal with the challenges that are facing the country? Because you cannot deal with the challenges facing the country by being destructive. That is not going to take South Africa forward. But we want to put it here and state it here that President Jacob Zuma is a president of the African National Congress. He is a president of the country. And therefore, like any other president of the ANC at any other moment of the ANC would always know what to do and how to deal with those kind of challenges that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to harp on some of the areas that have been touched, to say the responses that are given on the issue of the downgrade is that the paper was developed before the status that we are in today. And the commitment of the leadership of the African National Congress as it presents to you today is the ANC is taking leadership to ensure that what then has become of the downgrade, it makes us to get back into the document, look at the interventions that we've been making, that would link up to what Utano was saying, to say, in the interventions that we had set ourselves, because there was no junk status at that moment. As we move on and we are saying we had the program for industrialization and the rest of the interventions, as they would see, what then would work? Because what road we need to take is a road that brings us back to a status where we are able to be an investment destination in order for the rest of the programs that we want to do to really take effect. So it gives us that opportunity and an opportunity to articulate to South Africans and also make the world understand that we are in control, because we are in control of what South Africa has to do to move forward. And we are looking at a situation where we're not really expecting even members of the media to begin to make people to panic, to think now recession. We are at a young status where we want to get back into that road of being back into our investment grade. And therefore, there was a question that was asking to say, will it be government that would be doing these consultations, or will it be the organization? The organization has deployed people into various subsectors as we are sitting in the United States. So those sideline engagements will take place, because ultimately they must be brought back to this table as the African National Congress is going to have this thorough discussion that would have to put everybody on the same understanding, that would make us to communicate in one voice, and the ANC is able to say, these are then the interventions, these are then the priorities that we need to look, because you'll find that in the whole setup and impact that we're still going to unpack, as it was indicated, you'll find that there will be those sectors that would continue to cushion us, and therefore that would give the indication as to where then do you prioritize and make investments that will ensure that those continue to grow and cushion those that would be adversely affected. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we're concluding now, but I must be honest, there are substantive economic questions which cannot be answered easily. But before that, I mean, let me just say, these are discussion documents. What we would like to do is to invite people to make submissions, those who can, not necessarily the media, those who can. Let me just say, you know, when we launched the papers the other day here, it was on a Sunday. In the evening, I got calls from 2 CEOs from the banks, by the way. They've already read it, our documents. You know? So you are likely to see that people making more submissions than another viewpoint. That's the point I wanted to make. But let's make it, there are substantive economic questions which are difficult to answer. Let me just take the interest rate issue. It's a contentious issue in economics. Very, very contentious issue. On Friday, I was in a workshop full of academics from Australia, Canada, everywhere, on monetary economics in emerging economies, largely dominated by Keynesians. So I'm saying this, I'm crowding in answering your question. It's a fundamental correct question. Fundamental correct question. That is there no contradictory aspect? On the one hand, you want to industrialize, on the one hand, you are raising interest rates which are choking these small and medium enterprises because the cost of capital becomes expensive and therefore is kind of impacting on investment. It's a relevant question. It's something we have been debating this issue in the ANC for a while. You will remember that's precisely what led Minister Pravin Gordhan in February 2010 to issue the letter to the Reserve Bank. You remember what he said in the budget speech in 2010 was a response that you can't guys focus on currency stability only to the exclusion of employment. You know? So, but we ourselves turned some time to change. Immediately 2010, we became preoccupied with how to nationalize the mines, and we lost follow-up on what's happening in monetary policy. So I agree. It's a fundamental point. I would be misleading you if I say it's an easy question. This is something all of us need to engage on. How do we industrialize? Particularly in the context of the junk status, that question is going to become critical because we're going to see more interest rate hikes. So I agree with you, this is on the platinum issue, Comrade Zogwana tried to answer it, but there's one issue you're raising is the OPEC one, kind of creating this thing. Together with Zimbabwe, we're 90% of the, we have got about 80% of the market, Zimbabweans have got about 10% if I'm not mistaken, all right? So there's a potential for that, but what we need to do, first we've got to wrap up our minds and firm up what we want to do with platinum. It's all very well saying, let's create what do we want to do with it? 2 things arise. The first one, domestical. Can we make sure, for instance, every school in rural areas is powered with software so that we can make economies of scale? That's the debate we're beginning to. The second set of issues, there's what is called in economics substitutes. There's a threat to platinum in the form, 2 things that are beginning to emerge now. Palladium from Russia which is beginning to occupy the space, palladium and rhodium. And secondly, there's massive recycling that's taking place. Already about 20% of the market now is taken over by recycling, which has had an impact on this stuff. So I'm saying to you, there's a fundamental good economic questions we're grappling with them. I could say even the substantive in Gooks has tried to say no one is saying it's good, but you're correct. From where we sit, the structural aspects of the economy are still as they were last year, you see of it, which suggests that there's more, a trigger was more the political fear that the political reshuffle will impact on policy direction moving forward. So that's why we would come to a conclusion that it's a bit unfair. You see what I mean? But we've got to deal with the consequences of that. As to further briefing, Kusela will let you know. But holidays are impacting on our program. We thought we could grapple with this question as quickly as possible, but holidays are impacting on our program. On the consequences of not understanding, I read just quickly, I didn't read newspapers, but I saw just a quote that says, somebody says, no, we don't have billions in the in the stock exchange. Fundamental mistake. If the stock exchange just come down by 10%, public sector workers in one company will lose 13 billion in NARSPARS. Their pension, the PIC has got about 130 billion rand exposure to NARSPARS. If that 130 billion rand loses 10%, it's 13 pensioners. So let's not make, Clement, I'm trying to say is that part of the problem, we've not had an in-depth discussion of the, I was as a young activist in 1992 and 91, we were asking ourselves, those who were involved will remember, we were saying, should we pay the apartheid debt? I was one of those that said, to hell, we must not pay apartheid debt. I was one as a young activist that says we can't pay apartheid debt. Do you know what confronted us? Two issues. The first one was sovereignty. That the debt of a country continued, it does not belong to a political party, it belongs to the country. That is sovereignty. The second issue, because apartheid was, there were sanctions, only 4% of that debt was foreign. 96% of that debt was South African debt. Then we asked who owns this debt? Who are these people? When we drill down, we found that it's pensioners. That was a difficult question. We realized that if you don't pay the apartheid, you're actually not going to be paying our own pensioners. So, comrades, we need to have an understanding of who are the people who are investing. These people who are called institutional investors are basically people who take insurance from us, it's our money, are basically take our pensions and put them in the stock exchange. So when you say we don't have money in the stock exchange, it's not really correct, because it's our pensions that are losing value if we don't pay that. So I want to just to clarify that. On the FICA issue, who's asking that question? I still believe that it would have been proper, because even now, when it comes back from Parliament, there are still people who say they want to take it to the Constitutional Court. So in my view, that was last day, it would have been better to close the debate by taking it to the Constitutional Court once and for all. There are people even now who are saying they are going to take it to the Constitutional Court. I'm trying to check which questions have not been. I'm not talking, when I talk about the expenditure, I'm saying, I'm making it as a general proposition. I'm not saying there will be a nuclear cabinet. I'm saying as a general proposition, a government facing this thing when revenues are going to decline, there will be a requirement to cut expenditure. The question is that prioritization will, in the process, what will you cut? That's my point. You know, on the erosion of institutions, you know, SG has always made this point, that if I come into a department, I want my own DG. It's a matter which has been raised even in the National Executive. That's a matter that needs to be addressed, because by so doing, there's an erosion of institutional capacity. This is not an original on that point. It's something that has been discussed in the movement in general. So I'm saying sound economic questions. No one wants, there's a clear question that if you've got a recession, inclusive growth is going to be threatened, no doubt about that. So that's why it's our intention, if you see at the bullet points I was putting at the end, is to shift us in such a manner that we don't get to that level. Yeah, thanks very much for the time.
When Thandeka was asking about the economic forums, it was not these ones. You remember in the document? Remember in the document you said on the downgrade, part of what you need to do is to put together these economic forums and roundtables. That's the one that she was talking about. But is it state-driven or is it ANC-driven?
Both. Okay. On the, who's going to do this thing? You know, the Chinese have got a saying when I was in China, I don't know whether other nations have got a similar thing. They don't care what the color of the cat is, as long as they can catch the mouse. You know? So, in other words, they're looking at the objective. Is it the objective achieved? Is it going to be the party? We do have serious engagement with delegations of business. I can tell you next week we'll be having 2 of those delegations in the ANC headquarters and meet business. For instance, with the Chamber of Mines, we've had, particularly in 2010, we had no less than 12 meetings. So we meet a number of these associations. We will do it as ANC, but we've created one of the, people underestimate, is the only one in the world which is given legal status, a social dialogue institution, NEDLAC. We underestimate, the problem is we've turned it into a bargaining chamber, not into a consultative arrangement, and then is losing that strategic direction. So from a government perspective, I would imagine these are the issues that should be canvassed via the NEDLAC institution. Okay.
Thank you very much to all the panel members. We've come to the end of our briefing. Once again, let me thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for sticking to the policy interventions, the documents, raising critical questions that we believe that our people would want to know as we move towards the policy conference. We are continuing this conversation on social media from 12:30. Comrade Enoch will be taking questions. I'm sure Oli and others will also get some of your questions on Twitter, Facebook, and the ANC Instagram account. Thank you very much. The briefing is now closed. Thank you.